Okay, I'm just gonna start with arrays before I get on to the new things. So I'm just gonna write here arrays. That's really small. Okay, so what an array basically is, it's just basically a table of information. So in your computer you have a bunch of places in memory, and you usually just say, okay, I want one little spot of memory to store me a variable that I'm going to call x, and in here is going to be like 10, and the address is somewhere, I don't know, anywhere. It has an address, so it stores 10. Wait, let me just say this again. So basically it's like the number 10 lives here at this address and 10's name is x or something like that. But anyway, now what we want to do, we want to group a bunch of these elements together. So an array is essentially just a bunch of memory cells lined up together. It's just basically I'm just going to start with 1D arrays. It's basically just one line of information. So you can store like a bunch of things in here. Now, how these work is you initialize it by first saying the type of array. So I'm going to say it's going to be an int array. Then you give it a name. And then you give it a size. You don't always have to give it a size immediately, but you always just put these two things and then you put the size in the middle. Say I want it to be 10, semicolon. This is when you're initializing an array. So this is just my array name. Let me just make this more clear. Array name. You don't have to say array. As soon as you put these things in, it knows it's an array, and you can put a size in here if you want. So what I did here is I declared an integer array, or an array of type integer. So that means in each cell it will hold an integer type of value, and it's gonna be 10 blocks long. So now I have to do some counting. And yeah, so that is basically what we just did. And say now I want to assign values to these. So you can do anything with it, with this. So later on you can just say, okay, I want the one at position, say 3, to get 4. And then 4 will go at position 3. But the thing with arrays is, even though it's 10 elements long, it's going to start at 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9. It's just always like that. So if you want to access the first element, you're going to have to say array name 0. So just always -1 from the one that you want to access. So if you want to access element number 10, you're going to have to put in the number 9 there. And that is basically it for 1D arrays, or basically the basis of 1D arrays. So if you want to assign a bunch of values at once, let's say, okay, I want another integer array. I'm going to call it n, and it's going to be 5 elements long. And I want to assign values to these. So at declaration, I can already say this array gets, and you use the curly brace. And then you write in the values that you want to give it, separating each with a comma. And then you put a semicolon at the end, as always. What you can also do is, if you want to initialize everything to 0 at once, you can just put 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 here if you want. Or you can you can just do this. And then it assigns 0 to all the elements. Yeah. Just another thing I want to say about when you're initializing arrays. Say you want to use 2 arrays in your code. You don't have to say int array 1 and then list it under here as well if they're both of the same type. If you've got 2 integer arrays or 2 float arrays, I'm just going to use float as an example to show you could also get float arrays. You can just list them after each other. So there, separate with a comma, and then the next one I'm gonna call happy is gonna there. So you can list it like that as if you're saying, okay, I'm declaring a bunch of variables x, y, and then always end with a semicolon. So yeah, that's basically it for 1D arrays. For 2D arrays, just gonna use a different color. 2D arrays, it basically means it's you basically have a table of elements now with rows and columns. It's actually not that difficult if you just to know the basics. So the only difference here is you're just going to put in rows and columns. So I'm going to say it's going to be a float array. So I'll first say the type of array it is, and then my array name, I'm going to call it bubble, and then I'm going to make it have 2 places to put in the size. So sometimes they only require us to, when you're using it in a function or something, to only write a value here and not here, but that's just for in case you want to change the number of rows later, or you want to use the function for arrays with a higher number of rows, that, or like a different number of rows, but the same amount of columns. But it's doesn't really matter. So I'm just gonna say it's 3, 2. So what this is saying is there's an array called bubble of type float, and it has 3 rows because the first one's always the amount of rows, and 2 columns. So this is horrible. So essentially it's just this. It's just reserving this place in memory. And if you want to assign values to this, I'm just gonna call it B this time. I've already initialized this, so I don't have to initialize again. I'm just gonna assign values to it below here. B, oh no, I'll rather just do it here. Bubble to 2. It gets a bunch of values which are always enclosed in curly braces. But now you have to know exactly the position of each one. So how do we do this? What you're going to do now is you're going to have another curly brace inside these 2 big curly braces for each row. So I can see there are 2 rows here. 2 rows here, seeing as though I said 2 in the first space. So I'm going to have 2 of these mini curly braces separated by a comma. If there were 3 rows, I put in 3 of these little sets. Okay, sorry for all those notifications. I forgot to put it off. And then inside these, you list the values for the different columns in that row. So if I say 1, 2, and then the next one, I'm going to say 3 and 4. So basically what this is visually, there are 2 rows. I'm just going to call this, oh wait, this is row 1, but I mean it's index. I should have said it earlier. The number that you use to refer to that specific element is called the index. So this is the index. That's just what you call it when you're finding something. So I'm just going to put in here, this is the first row, but its index is 0. Index is just address basically. And this is the second row, but its index is 1. So for row 0, I put in 1, and the next column I put in 2. And then it's closed curly brace, comma, next one, it's 3 and 4. And that is, that's basically it for 2D arrays regarding initialization. I just want to make a note that you can have arrays of, well, a character arrays. So basically, you can use an array to store a word or certain letters and things like that. So you just have to specify it with the word char. Let's put this in a new color again. So char is the type you say. I'm going to call this what am I going to call it? I'm going to call this USB just because I can. So this string is called, or this, yeah, the array that I'm calling USB. And I'm not going to specify the size. That means the computer doesn't know how many elements are going to be in the array. I'm just going to, you don't even have to specify the size for these types of things. Just when you're initializing a 2D array, just specify at least one of these. Otherwise, you're just, I don't know, pointing to a random point in space. Yeah, so you can assign this with double quotation marks. Hello. Close it and then there. So then it will, the word hello is stored in an array of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this is 5 letters. So there's 5 elements plus an extra element. So this array is actually 6 elements long. And the reason is because there's always a null element in a string for some reason. I think you can use it sometimes. Say now you want to check each letter and you're using a loop and you want it to say, okay, terminate this loop when if the value inside this element is null. So yeah, null is just this. It's a backslash and a 0, but it's not that important. I think that we need to use that ever. But just know that this, if they even ever ask a question like this, even though this is 5 different letters that they're actually storing in here, so it's 5 elements, that's the size that is now allocating, there's always an extra one for the null character. And you can also do it this way. Instead of using double quotations writing the word, you can say char USB, doesn't matter what the size is, and use curly braces to assign the individual characters to each element. So you can just say, okay, and then comma, and then you have to say the null character because you're putting these in individually. If you use this method, you don't have to put in the null character, it does that automatically, but here you have to say, this is just a backslash, and this is a bit unclear, backslash 0. No, that was a curly brace. And then, yeah, but if you scan something like this, you, if you have to, if you're asking the user to input the characters for a character array, and you need to scan them, you scan F, and the thing is you use is percentage sign S, then comma, and then whatever the name is. Yeah, that's about it.